Hello, good evening. Welcome to Novara Live. It's Tuesday. My name's Bastani. I have the immense pleasure of being joined by one Mike Bankole. Mike, how are we?
Yeah, very well. It's good to be back reunited. The B team haven't been in action for a while, but we're back today and ready to deliver a top show.
We are. And also, congratulations. There was a very handsome picture of you receiving your PhD on Twitter. Well done.
Thank you very much. Very, very kind of you, and appreciate all the lovely messages I've got from some Novara listeners.
It's a big accomplishment. Coming up later tonight, we have a packed show. Really packed, too packed. The UK government have finally suspended arms sales to Israel. Elon Musk has spent the afternoon frenetically tweeting about the UK. And Nigel Farage has spoken out saying he has nothing to do with the recent unrest. In fact, he's a victim, would you believe? Stay tuned for all of that. Racist violence in Britain continues this week, with the far right conducting further riots and attacks. On Monday night in Belfast, a man in his 50s was left in a serious condition by attackers who stamped on his head in what is being treated as a hate crime. Rioters attacked police in South Belfast for several hours, throwing petrol bombs, masonry, and bricks. In Plymouth, police were injured in sustained violence, which saw fireworks let off and a riot van damaged. Hundreds of anti-racist protesters faced off against the far right, chanting, "Shame on you." There was also disorder in Darlington, where bricks were hurled at police. Tonight, Keir Starmer will also be chairing another emergency Cobra meeting on the continued action to tackle the violent unrest. So far, over 400 people have been arrested following the last week of disorder. But while the government has promised swift criminal justice for rioters, there are concerns that a surge in inmates would, quote, cripple and destabilise England's jails. Speaking to the Financial Times, Vice President of the Prison Governors Association, Carl Davies, said this: "If we were to see a surge like that, if we were to see that many people enter prisons in a one-hit approach, it would cripple and destabilise the system. We can only lock up so many people before we physically run out of space." And earlier today, Home Secretary Yvette Cooper said this: "We've made sure there are additional prosecutors in place, that there are prisons, that prison places are ready, and also that the courts stand ready as well." Pretty extraordinary to see already conflicting things being said by the Home Secretary and somebody who is obviously more familiar with the state of prisons in this country. Mike, we heard in the first few days of the Starmer government how prisoners would face early release to create space in the system. Of course, James Timpson was giving all sorts of interviews, particularly on BBC Radio 4 most memorably. But if several thousand people are incarcerated, which is what happened after 2011, where precisely are they meant to go?
Exactly, and that's the problem. I think the government find themselves in a bit of an issue, right? Because the government, and the thrust of Starmer's critique and kind of analysis has been the full force of the law, right? So his response to the riots is, and I understand the impulse as the Prime Minister is, these people must be held accountable to the law, they must face the full force of the law, etc., etc. And in some ways that sounds good, and people, some people may be reassured by that. But I think the problem is, as Starmer acknowledged himself about a month ago, prisons are overcrowded in this country. We have an issue when it comes to people who want more prisons to be built. Those plans are actually underway, but they're years behind schedule, right? So even if you're one of those people that will just build more, those plans are happening. So I think the problem for Labour is a lot of their kind of responses has been premised on, well, we're just going to lock these people up and throw the key away. But you can't do that if there's no space for these people. So I think ultimately, one of the problems with Starmer's response to this has been a very narrow lens of, well, the issue is we have a coordinated response, we lock these people in prison, and we move on. And I think, yes, look, I don't think someone who's burning a hotel should be roaming the streets of Britain. I don't think people who are attacking ethnic minorities with impunity should be roaming the streets of Britain. I do think it's important as people are in prison, but I also do think that the fundamental problem with Starmer's response is it's been breached with this very narrow lens of carceral justice, right? We just lock all these fascists in prison and the problem goes away. I don't think that's how you deal with the problem. The problem is bigger than just looking at fascists. The problem is about challenging for ideology in a very thorough and direct way, not emboldening these ideas, not allowing these ideas to fester in society. So look, I do think this, the government have found themselves in an issue now where they've said, Tories have let us have these overcrowded prisons, and they've acknowledged this is really a big issue, but you can't acknowledge that as an issue, and a month later be like, we're just going to throw every single writer in prison and throw the key away. That's not how it works. I think Starmer needs to kind of broaden the lens of his kind of response to this moment far more, and also, acknowledge that prisons aren't going to just kind of solve fascism and address fascism.
Yeah, it's an interesting debate, isn't it? I mean, I think basically everybody involved in serious disorder should be incarcerated. I think that's just obvious at this point. But I think you're right. And also there's an extra angle to this, Mike, which is some of the people who are already going in front of magistrates. And of course, these are serious crimes. They're going to go to Crown Court, but they're facing magistrates. So we see their background. Some of these people have had 30 charges against them, have been to prison multiple times. It didn't stop them from getting involved in racist pogroms. So why would another stint at His Majesty's pleasure make any difference? But I do think in the short term, it's very important to get these people off the streets. And I think it speaks volumes about the UK. It speaks volumes about the UK that we don't have the state capacity to put people involved in racist pogroms or serious violent disorder, people involved in, arson with potential threat to human life. We have people saying, who are very familiar with the carceral system in this country, we don't have the capacity or the ability to lock them up. I mean, I really think that speaks volumes about the capacity of the British state. You might be anti-prisons, but I still think it's really significant. It says something very powerful, actually, about how weakened the British state has become, really since the Thatcherite project of the 1980s. Of course, Thatcher emboldened the police. She gave them significant amounts of resources, but it just doesn't seem to me that we actually have a proper nation state anymore that's capable of seriously dealing with this stuff, which is remarkable. And by the way, in the early 2010s, we did. We're meant to be the fifth, sixth biggest economy in the world, nuclear power, UN Security Council. We have people saying, if there is mass violent disorder on the streets, we can't lock them up. I'm amazed, frankly. It's an amazing story. Trade unions have spoken out against the disorder too. Mick Lynch has called for a, quote, movement-wide response to prevent, quote, vile shows of racism dividing working-class unity. He added this: as trade unionists, we are central to our society, upholding values of peace, solidarity, and working-class unity. And in the days ahead, we must do all within our power to oppose hate and division in our communities and workplaces. The CW, RMT, and Fire Brigades Union have all directed union branches to offer support and solidarity to local mosques, refugee centres, and solidarity groups. The general public, meanwhile, is unsurprisingly taking a pretty dim view of the disorder. Polling by YouGov shows that 67% of people think that the word thugs describes those taking part in the disorder, while only 16% think they are, quote, people with legitimate concerns. Fewer than 1 in 10 think they are patriotic. However, a majority of respondents have sympathy with people taking part in protests peacefully, which would indicate that they don't necessarily have a problem with the grievances, but merely with how they're being represented. Meanwhile, further evidence of the extremely violent nature of the protests has emerged. The Times report that Telegram users in radical right-wing groups shared instructions on how to make homemade petrol bombs and an arson manual produced by a neo-Nazi group. It's all part of efforts by the far right to escalate recent violence with a series of attacks on Wednesday evening against immigration lawyers and help centres. And while the last week of rioting was unexpected, a disorder on Wednesday night has been exposed and publicised. Police chiefs say that an extra 2,200 riot-trained officers are to be deployed. Anti-racist groups are also expected to mobilise against far-right hate. There will be anti-racist demonstrations in Liverpool, Portsmouth, Southampton, Aldershot, Sheffield, Nottingham, Birmingham, Brighton and Bristol. In London, there will be mobilisations in Waltham Forest and Harrow. Lawyers have urged the government to address concerns about their safety. Law Society President Nick Emerson said this: "We have serious concerns about the safety and well-being of our members following names and addresses of a number of solicitors' firms and advice agencies being shared on a list of targets for further protest and violence this week." The finger of blame is being pointed at far-right influencers such as Stephen Yaxley Lennon, aka Tommy Robinson or Tommy 10 Names, Lawrence Fox, and Reform MP Nigel Farage. Meanwhile, the precise makeup of the riots is being discussed. as in this BBC report.
A range of people took part in the disorder, from children to long-term far-right activists. One of those present in Southport was a convicted terrorist, neo-Nazi Matthew Hankinson, using the mayhem to promote a race war.
However, not everyone who riots will be a Russian, Ukrainian-inspired neo-Nazi or a convicted terrorist. Nobody buys this information or believes in racist moral panics in a vacuum. So here's Andrew Pearce on GMB talking about how, quote, some communities feel disaffected.
It's not just far right, is it? If in some communities where they feel their jobs have been taken, their homes have been taken, there's too much pressure on school places, that's not far right telling them that. It's what they see and what they feel. And I think the government ignore this at their peril because it's a factor. It's a factor. Look at some of the people who've been arrested already. A 14-year-old kid, for God's sake, just a child, a seasoned criminal. Look, I mean, of course there's a vacuum here, but I think we ignore these feelings of resentment and isolation at our peril.
There's too much pressure on school places. Andrew, schools are closing. Schools are closing in London because there's not enough kids. The birth rate in this country is, I think, about 1.5. In London, it's 1.34. In Scotland, it's 1.2. We don't have a problem with, that's not the problem, right? There aren't enough kids. And by the way, that's going in one direction. Mike, can I get you to respond to that clip of Andrew Pearce on GMB?
Andrew Pearce and his analysis of this whole situation has just been really, really poor. And I think, the right in general have tried to focus on this issue in terms of, the legitimate concerns of these people and, the fact that, these people are raising the concerns that many of us have. And yes, they're acting in ways that we don't agree with, but they have legitimate concerns. And the problem is their concerns aren't legitimate, because I think Ash spoke about yesterday on the show with Michael, and they had a really good back and forth about immigration and how the left should deal with immigration rights. I think Ash made a really astute point, right? And what's happened in this country over the last kind of, in the post-war years, I think, especially, you can kind of thread the lines, Ash did yesterday, from Enoch Powell to the moment we exist in today. And what's happened is immigration debates have been inherently racialized, right? So even during the EU debate, right, the Brexit debate, yes, some of that was about Polish people and, people from Europe in this country. But if we remember quite clearly during that moment, it then circled back to Muslims, right? Well, also, if we stay in the EU, what's going to happen is Muslims are going to enter this country through the back door because Turkey will join the EU. That was the narrative. And we saw Farage posing in front of that poster. I think it was tipping point or kind of crossing point, this really kind of polemic poster behind him. So it was about restricting access to a particular type of person. So when people speak about, there's pressure on schools, there's pressure on the NHS, there's all of these things, and it's kind of hinting that immigration is a problem. These concerns are legitimate. Immigration should be framed in this country as a good and positive thing. Yes, the system needs to be regulated. There needs to be some form of regulation. Of course it does. I don't think anyone on the left is denying that. But I think the undertone of a lot of our conversations with immigration is always about, there's a particular type of person that shouldn't exist in this country. There's a particular type of person that shouldn't come to this country because they're going to place pressure on our resources. And we have to remember what's happened over the last few years is, in many cases, people come to this country, migrants and people seeking a better life, and have no access to public funds, right? They're paying an NHS surcharge, so they're paying a tax and an NHS surcharge just to access public services in some cases. And in other cases, people have no access to public services at all. So this idea that, there's these legitimate concerns and, people have these real problems that I don't think that's true. And I think that's one of the legacies of the Conservatives for the past 14 years, because we've had crumbling health services, we've had crumbling public infrastructure. We've had, low pay endemic. We've had these really converging crises during the last 14 years. And a lot of the conservative analysis has been, well, it's that immigrants' faults. We need to stop the boats. We need to stop the immigrants. We need a harsher immigration system. We need a hostile approach to immigration. So much of the problems we face, and Labour have been guilty of this as well, by the way. The new Labour years were very dangerous years for demonising asylum seekers. But so many of the problems we face, whether it's in schools or whether it's in the NHS, whatever it is, have been blamed on immigrants. And these aren't legitimate concerns. These are straw men. Arguments are being built that blame immigrants for problems that weren't caused by immigrants, were caused by the way society is structured that favours the wealthy ahead of the most marginalised. And that's what we need to deal with. But people like Andrew Pierce are saying there's pressure on schools and we need to do something about immigration. And I think those views are the views that Labour and many of us on the left need to continue to challenge quite firmly.
I think that's true. I mean, there's so much to talk about here. I do think, in a way, if you reflect on the last 5 years, you have the Tories talking about immigration, and you have net immigration of 1.3 million in 2 years. Now, some people watching this think that's too high, some people don't care, whatever. But clearly, if you're the party of reducing immigration and you have 1.3 million, net immigration over 2 years, I think inevitably that's going to create some sort of political overhead. Inevitably. And again, I'm not trying to explain what these people have done. I think it's appalling. There is zero justification for what these people are doing. But in terms of people saying, well, hang on, I voted for the Tories, they keep on banging on about immigration, how they're going to reduce it, and then we have 1.3 million net immigration. What's going on? So I think in a way you could almost not predict this. I couldn't have predicted this. I don't think anybody could have predicted this. I mean, some of the 1970s, 1980s coded racism, particularly to people of South Asian heritage, is just extraordinary. It's like watching an episode, it's like watching tens of thousands of Afghanites. I certainly couldn't have predicted that. Something that Ash said as well, by the way, that, it's just quite stunning to see something which you kind of thought, but to actually apprehend it is something else entirely. But you have this party saying, we hate immigration, we need to reduce immigration. And then since 2010, they've been in power 14 years and it goes up. And then people vote for Brexit. They're told that means it's about immigration. And then immigration goes up again. In a way, it's quite predictable. But by the way, the left has nothing to do with that. That's entirely on the Conservative Party, which makes it even more remarkable that you have all these idiots, frankly, on Twitter, many of them in the media, who are saying, oh, wow, Labour need to go. What, you get the Tories back because they talk about immigration while having record high net immigration and not making the case for immigration. I suppose that's where the dissonance is. You have very high immigration and then you talk about how bad it is. You don't make the case for it. And look, the reality is, I'm sure in 20, 30 years' time, people in this country, in many countries, will be begging for immigration because of what I said before about fertility rates. It's just obvious. If you have a birth rate, which we do have, heading towards one person per couple, one child per couple, in 2 generations, you go from 100 to 40 to 16 people. That's what happens. And to just keep your society ticking along, you're going to have immigration. And I think, frankly, again, it's another lie that's coming from the right. I don't want to even necessarily moralize it. There's a huge contradiction here because you have people like Farage saying we can have less immigration, we can have low inflation, we can have high growth, and we can have low tax. They're living in a fantasy if they're saying you can have low immigration, but also you can have the low taxes of the 1980s because of our fertility rates, because of the climate crisis, because of our underinvestment in the public realm for decades. Simply not true. Simply a lie, a deceit. Mike, before we go to the next story, we do have these protests, potentially going to be more than protests. Tomorrow night, they're likely to be a flashpoint. But law enforcement have plenty of intelligence and have prepared for certain eventualities, I'm sure pretty bad eventualities in certain places, most likely. What are your expectations?
I actually don't know what to expect because I think for the first time, it feels like everyone seems to know what's going to happen. I don't know if this is the far right trying to spread loads of fear, ever maybe not turning up, but just spreading the fear, or if the far right are like, well, actually, look, we're going to go to these places and you can't stop us. And I wonder how the police respond to that, because I do think so far the police haven't really controlled this. And if you think back to the London riots or London's disturbances of 2011, and that happened across the country, actually, they were kind of under control fairly swiftly once the police kind of got involved. And I don't think so far this has happened. We've actually seen, yesterday we saw scenes of violence, and tomorrow again predicted to be seeing scenes of violence. So I do worry about what's going to happen. And I think, as someone from a minority background, I know loads of my friends and family are a bit worried about going out tomorrow, frankly, because it's just like, well, look, we've seen the scenes across the country, we've seen what's happened, and people are terrified. And I don't think that's the way we should be living in Britain in 2024. People shouldn't be terrified to leave their homes because some far-right fascists are going to attack them. So I do worry what's going to happen tomorrow, but I wonder if the far-right are trying to kind of bait people and maybe not turn up at those locations, turn up somewhere else, or I don't know what it is, but I think the fact that they're targeting kind of like these kind of people who are working on behalf of migrants, whether it's kind of like charities, etc., it does show again to speak to the Conservative Party and speak to kind of the attack on experts, the attacks on woke lawyers, it does speak to the fact that has consequences, right? If you frame these people as woke lawyers who are trying to interrupt your justice and your kind of policy making, it does have consequences, and people are going to, unfortunately, kind of idiots are going to go, unfortunately, trying to attack and kind of intimidate these people.
Having encouraged pogroms against minority ethnic communities, far-right agitators are now blaming Muslims for the violence. A footage has emerged of groups of Muslim men in Birmingham taking to the streets wearing face coverings and at times engaging in acts of violence or intimidation. A Sky News crew were reporting in the area when this happened.
As protesters gathered and we attempted to report live, it became clear the media weren't welcome.
A sense of anger, I think you can hear there.
We decided to leave, but as we drove away, this man, armed with a knife, attempted to slash a tyre on one of our vans.
He's going to slash the tyres.
Oh, he's going to do the same to us.
Why? That was a reporter being threatened. Then after leaving their vehicle was chased by a man with a knife who attempted to slash their tyres. Birmingham Yardley MP Jess Phillips criticised Reform's Richard Tice for sharing the first part of that clip, even though it was broadcast on TV, saying this: these people came to this location because it has been spread that racists were coming to attack them. This misinformation was spread entirely to create this content. Don't spread it, Mr. Tice. Look, it's been broadcast on Sky News. I think that horse has left the stable. Far-right agitators such as Stephen Yaxley Lennon, a.k.a. Tommy Robinson, a.k.a. Tommy 10 Names, are sharing videos of such incidents and saying, "I told you so," claiming this proves they were right all along. Mike, what do you make of Jess Phillips' comments?
I think it's interesting. I think, look, it was broadcast on Sky, right? And I do think Sky well within the rights to broadcast it. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think the problem with Richard Tice's tweet was he framed it as, look at these pro-Gaza protesters, look at them, what they're doing. I don't think there's people had much to do with kind of pro-Palestine protests or anything like that. I do think one of the things in this moment that's really important for us as maybe ethnic minorities is, and this is this can be difficult at times, is to not respond to violence with violence, right? And I think there are two reasons for this. I think the first thing is we lose the moral high ground by doing so, right? So I think at the moment, generally speaking, people in the country are looking on at these far right kind of pogroms and riots with disgust, right? Most people, even people on the right, would look at them and be like, "That's stupid. These people are idiots." I think the moment we then respond with violence, people are then allowed to go, "Oh look, maybe they were right. Maybe these kind of Black and Asian people are thugs, etc." So I think that's one reason you kind of lose the kind of moral high ground. I think the second reason is this is what Tommy Robinson wants, right? This is what the far right want. The far right, in many ways, are trying to incite a race riot. They're trying to lure people of color onto the streets to kind of join them. Not join them, to kind of essentially to attack them. They want Muslims to be Muslim men and maybe Black men to come onto the streets in their kind of balaclavas or whatever, and let's fight. And I think that's what they want. So I don't think we should give them what they want. I do think there is a response here that isn't us resorting to violence. And I do think that there will be some people who are going to listen to these comments and think Mike's talking a load of rubbish. Violent resistance is important. It's important to defend ourselves. And look, I understand that impulse and that instinct, that desire to defend yourselves. Of course, people's mothers are being attacked. People's parents are being attacked. I would understand that kind of fire in someone's belly to go, I'm not taking this. I understand that completely. And I'm not saying that it's irrational to have that feeling, but I do think this is what they want. They want to bait us out. They want us to go into the streets. They want us to act in ways that confirm their racist and disgusting views about us. And look, I think it's deeply unfair that we live in a society where the bar for Black and brown people is much higher than the bar for white people. So you look at the way in which these kind of riots are being framed by some in the media, they're still being called protest. They're called anti-immigrant protests in the BBC, I think. So that framing wouldn't happen if it was kind of black and brown people. When there was any kind of slight disturbance at Lives Matter process, they weren't being framed in kind of very rosy terms, right? So I do get that. I don't think it's not right. We live in a racist society. Trust racism's endemic. I get all of those things. But I do still think, I don't think violence is the responses. I don't think us taking to the streets and essentially acting in ways that are equally, not good, like slashing ties of reporters, that doesn't solve anything. And I do feel quite strongly about that being my point of view. So yeah, I don't think that that really solves anything. And I think that there are kind of more useful ways we can kind of come together as a community and as people to address this.
I mean, I'm inclined to agree. The guy who had the face covering and on his bike and said, fuck the EDL, free Palestine. Great. And by the way, that might be upsetting or intimidating for somebody, but it's a free society. He's not broken any laws. I want a written constitution to precisely enshrine that kind of free speech, right? But slashing the tires of journalists is not good. It's not good. And just to build quickly on your point, Mike, what Tommy Robinson wants is inter-ethnic conflict. That's what he wants, right? He wants, quote unquote, self-defense along racialized lines. That's what he wants. He wants to fragment the idea of a shared political and social community between people of different races. That's literally what he wants. Now, look, people are going to be very angry, very upset. They've got very justified grievances. And obviously, self-defense is 101. You have to do that. Of course you do. But beyond that is something very dangerous. And it's something that, local religious or political or community leaders are saying that. And particularly with young men, it's hard, right? Because, I was a young man once upon a time, believe it or not. You're very, up for defending yourself and your community. But there is a major aspect here of that falling into these predetermined lines that the likes of Robinson want to create. So I think the minute you go beyond self-defense and look, slashing tires of journalists is not self-defense, I think it's probably not useful. In many instances, I understand it, but it's not useful, it's unhelpful, it's counterproductive if you're trying to reduce the likelihood of further race riots from the likes of Tommy Robinson and Continuity EDL. We'll have more on the riots later. Thames Water is the privately owned water company that covers London and much of the home counties. It supplies 16 million households and has become a byword for failure and incompetence. And now, after the largest ever investigation into the water sector by the regulator, Ofwat, it's in deep trouble. Again. And that's because it has been hit with a massive £104 million fine. And it's not alone. Other private water companies, specifically Yorkshire and Northumbrian Water, now have to pay fines of £47 million and £17 million respectively. It's important to add that 8 other water suppliers remain under investigation. Basically, everybody's gone and done something. But why were these guys fined? Ofwat's chief executive, David Black, said this. Ofwat has uncovered a catalogue of failure by Thames Water, Yorkshire Water and Northumbrian Water in how they ran their sewage works, and this resulted in excessive spills from storm overflows. Our investigation has shown how they routinely released sewage into our rivers and seas, rather than ensuring that this only happens in exceptional circumstances as the law intends. The level of penalties we intend to impose signals both the severity of the failings and our determination to take action to ensure water companies do more to deliver cleaner rivers and seas. The report also highlighted how the relevant companies had also failed to adequately manage the plants, with executives, including at board level, failing to oversee treatment operations. In other words, company management wasn't doing the basics properly. And either they knew what was happening, or they should have known what was happening. But don't worry, these people only get salaries and bonuses in the hundreds of thousands of pounds. No big deal. When you're paid so little, it's totally understandable that you make this kind of screw up. Now, for Thames in particular, which is teetering on the brink of insolvency, this is massive news. After all, the fine accounts for almost 10% of their annual turnover, which is a particularly big deal given they have a dwindling cash pile, which was already set to run out next March. And with this fine, that timeline has likely shortened. Then there's the fact that just last month, Thames Water was found to have breached its operating license after its credit rating was slashed to junk status by rating agencies. That could mean the possibility of yet another fine of up to 10% of annual turnover by Ofwat. So Thames is looking at another 100 million plus fine. Max, they've had one of 104 million. They could have another similar fine. But it doesn't stop there, because Ofwat is also investigating Thames for potentially breaching rules on dividend payments. And that is something which is expected to carry a £40 million fine. So, one fine down, two to go. But there's more. That's because in July, the Supreme Court ruled that private landowners and individuals can seek redress for sewage released into waterways. That's good. That's widely viewed as paving the way for more claims against private water companies, maybe many, many more. And it seems fairly obvious that a deluge of legal cases and fines will make it harder for water companies, including Thames Water, to raise the equity needed for their businesses to stay afloat, let alone improve infrastructure. And yet, Thames Water paid out over £158 million in dividends to shareholders in the year to March. And Chris Weston, who joined the company as chief executive in January, took a £195,000 bonus for the 3 months to the end of March. A bonus of almost £200,000 for 3 months. That took his total pay for the period, 3 months, to £437,000. Almost £500,000 for 3 months' work, signing off a £158 million dividend. And this is for a company with £18 billion of debt and £19 billion of infrastructure in poor condition. We cover a lot of crazy, messed up stuff on this show, you might have noticed. But this story genuinely defies belief. How? How has nobody gone to prison for this? Remember, Thames Water, like all of the other privately owned water companies, was privatised in the late 1980s. They had zero debt. Now they have £18 billion worth of debt. We're looking at mass criminality, legalised mass criminality. How is it legalised, you might say? After all, you've just talked about all these fines and likely court cases. True. But the point is that the people paying for that will be the service users. It'll be the taxpayer. While those little piggies who've had their little snouts in the trough and who've benefited from this institutional corruption will have moved on to the next corporate grift. Elon Musk is the wealthiest person on the planet. According to the Forbes real-time rich list, he was, at 3 p.m. today, UK time, worth $221 billion. That's more than Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, and Warren Buffett. By way of comparison on this side of the Atlantic, the wealthiest person in the UK is hedge fund manager Michael Platt. I've never heard of him, but there you go. He's worth a paltry $18 billion. There's no comparison, really. In which case, let's try countries instead. If Elon Musk's personal wealth was a country's GDP, he would be the 57th largest economy on Earth, just sandwiched between Hungary and Ethiopia. And while he's most famous for Tesla, he is the majority owner in one of the largest private companies in the United States. Of course, that's SpaceX. Part of SpaceX is Starlink, which consists of 6,000 satellites in space, providing a space-based global 5G internet. They're planning to increase that number of satellites to 34,000. He's also the most followed account on X with 193 million followers. But more importantly, he just happens to also own that platform. And that ownership is very active. Indeed, after Musk's tweet during a Super Bowl did less well than President Biden's, the then CEO ordered major changes to the algorithm. Basically, if you have opinions he agrees with, you do much, much better than before. And if he doesn't like you, well, tough. There's an argument that Musk is more influential than even Rupert Murdoch in his pomp. I increasingly think so. And it's certainly true that his influence massively extends beyond just the United States by virtue of his acquisition of X and his very hands-on involvement there. Now, Musk has taken aim at the UK, Prime Minister Keir Starmer in particular. Yesterday, a press officer from Number 10 responded to Musk's initial comments from several days ago when he said that civil war in the UK was inevitable. And that seems to have particularly upset the native South African, because over the course of today, Musk has launched a torrent of tweets, including the use of a hashtag and tagging the UK Prime Minister twice. First today, in UK-related content, he retweeted this video of a man being arrested on suspicion of breaching the Electronic Communications Act. Arrested for making comments on Facebook? Is this Britain or the Soviet Union? Is this accurate? Community notes? Perfectly fine and reasonable comment, to be honest, on his part, you might think. But that was just the start of a very long tirade, because 3 hours later came this. He retweeted a graphic comparing the sentences of two far-right activists to that of a convicted rapist, saying, "Is this accurate?" at community notes. And then came this, which was retweeted by him. It's a meme depicting soldiers raiding a house with the caption, "We saw your meme. Step outside." The user said UK soon, and Musk replied, "Sounds like that is the UK now." Then there was this, where he tagged the PM. "Is this still happening?" at Keir Starmer, and it's a screenshot of a Daily Mirror front page from a while back. At Rothmus, he's bolstering all these random accounts nobody's ever heard of. Quite extraordinary. Then there was this. It's that same graphic from before, but this time Musk is saying, "Oh, what the hell is going on?" I mean, you're retweeting the same thing multiple times. It's just weird behavior, right? This guy's 193 million followers on X. Then there was this, retweeting a video of Muslim counter-protesters in Birmingham, tagging Keir Starmer again, and he added in a reply the hashtag two-tier Keir. He wasn't done yet, though. There's more. Next, Musk tweeted a picture of Peter Griffin from Family Guy in an electric chair, saying, "In 2030 for making a Facebook comment the UK government didn't like." And the final tweet was a subtweet. It's X after all. Union flag, top source of news in the UK. He's quote tweeting Doge designer, who's talking about the X app being the #1 news app in the UK. He's basically saying, "Look, I'm getting loads of stick from legacy media. I'm going toe-to-toe with the Prime Minister. You're calling me the bad guy. I can't be that bad because my app, X, is so popular." Before I go to you, Mike, I just want to share this tweet from David Aronovich, who is someone I disagree with on almost everything. It's pretty obvious that Elon Musk exercises immense power and uses it with complete irresponsibility. He's accountable to no one, it seems. We need to think seriously about how we as a country respond. Mike, how big a problem is it for Starmer that Elon Musk is picking a fight with him on what seems right now an hourly basis?
I think it is an issue, right? Because we have to remember Twitter is central to British politics discourse, right? We know that journalists are always on Twitter. We know that we ourselves are on Twitter and fairly active on Twitter as well. And what's happening here is Elon Musk, as you mentioned, has changed the algorithm now. So I think if you're on Twitter now, you'll see far more right-wing news stories than you would see left-wing stories, partly because of how the algorithm works. So now it kind of Elon Musk likes a tweet, and all of a sudden it's on your kind of your timeline in many ways. So I do think it is a problem that kind of this platform that's central to our kind of British political communication is being run by a guy who embraces chaos and provides a platform for extremists. I mean, even when I tweet sometimes, I tweeted something about Nigel Farage. Nigel Farage gave that kind of tweet video where he's kind of sat there talking about Southport. And I tweeted saying I was responsible that video was still up because Farage was spreading misinformation. And one of the responses to that tweet was, "You're not British, go back home," or something, or "stay out of this." And if I was to report that tweet, nothing would happen. I think what's also happened on Twitter is people, who try to get involved in political discourse like I did are being abused. So I do think it is a problem that Elon Musk, who's so central to Twitter is just so central to our kind of like political discourse and discussion, is being run by this guy who just has no care for kind of platform extremists, tackling abuse on his platform. And also for Keir Starmer, it isn't ideal that, again, this platform that's being used by so many people, lots of the news we're seeing as his kind of reactionary takes. He seems to be waging a war on Keir Starmer as things stand. And look, I think Keir Starmer can just kind of ignore it for now. we're only 4 weeks into a Labour government, right? And this is how he's responding to this moment, which is a really important moment, I would argue, in Britain's recent history. How's that going to look in 6 months' time when Keir Starmer inevitably does things that Elon Musk as a kind of right-wing reactionary would it be to comfort with? Is he going to constantly undermine him on his platform and constantly kind of platform extremists who have views that he would agree with that also disagree with Keir Starmer? I think that's going to be an issue for kind of Starmer, like the kind of discourse just constantly being kind of ferociously right-wing discourse on Twitter. And I'm not trying to overestimate or overstate how important Twitter is. I'm just saying it is, in some ways, kind of central to our political discourse. But I do think Elon Musk more broadly is dangerous, right? I think he's dangerous because he is so powerful and he's so willing to express these extremist views and misinformation. And he knows he can do so with impunity. So I do think that the tweet you shared earlier, I think there is an interesting point, because I do think someone like Elon Musk, who's inflaming tensions in our politics, that should be diplomatically consequential in my view. I think that there should be some consequences for that, whether it's, with SpaceX and maybe limiting access to our airspace, that's mentioned earlier. I don't know what it is, but there does need to be consequence for a man who's that powerful, inflaming tension in our politics. And I also think some of the things he says are deeply dangerous, right? So let's tackle the two-tier policing that he kind of mentioned in one of his tweets there. Anyone who's lived in Britain for the past kind of 20, 30 years would know that's an absolute load of nonsense. If anything, this two-tier policing works in the inverse ways. What people are saying is, like Tom Robinson is saying is, white people are being policed far harder than, black and brown people. That's fundamentally not true. The post 9/11 kind of legacy, and one of the legacies of 9/11 was the over-policing of Muslim communities, right? So Muslims were monitored in schools, in their places of worship, in their public spaces. There was an over-policing of Muslims. And we know that black people are disproportionately more likely to be stopped and searched than white people in Britain. So again, this is Elon Musk spreading misinformation on his app, platforming these extremists, allowing abuse to foster. That can't be good for our political discourse, especially as I mentioned, Twitter in many ways is a space where people come together and discuss politics. If the guy who's running that platform is acting in ways that are irresponsible, that is consequential, I think. And I do think Britain might, begin to explore kind of what they can do to kind of address this. 'Cause I do think it is an issue.
I think a lot of people are sleeping on this. People talk about overseas influence in our politics, Russia, China. This is a bigger problem. This, by the way, the Russia-China thing is just ridiculous. This is a bigger problem. We're saying, we can't have China build 5G in this country because of security. You have the world's wealthiest person with 193 million Twitter followers, ex-followers, saying that Britain's headed to civil war. Talking about two-tier policing in the UK. When was the last time he was in the UK? Has he ever been to a British protest? Of course he hasn't. I think this is a much bigger problem. So there are people saying, if you've got Xiaomi or BYD cars, Chinese EV manufacturers, those cars, when they come to the UK, they have to have a massive tariff on them. Why? Why are they more dangerous than Elon Musk? I would actually, let me upset some people. I'd rather have the tariffs on the Tesla cars. And I'd rather have the Xiaomi for $30,000 that looks like a Porsche Taycan, thank you very much, and it has a better range. So you're getting a better car for the British consumer, and you're giving a punch on the nose to this arsehole on the other side of the Atlantic. On the left, we have to have major concerns about massive concentrations of power within individuals. But I don't trust the government. Guess what? You elect the government. I agree with you. You need defenses against an overwhelming government. Of course you do. It's something that people in politics and political theory have talked about for centuries, millennia. Of course. But you get rid of governments. Nobody elected Elon Musk. He doesn't know what he's talking about, right? He has no idea what he's talking about. And he's going through sort of these divorce proceedings, child custody with Grimes. He's got his daughter saying things about him on Twitter, which he presumably thinks are unpleasant. He sounds an awful human being, by the way. He's in the middle of a legal battle with Don Lemon, a US journalist. Like, he has all this crap on his plate, and he relaxes by stirring the pot in UK politics after we've had race riots? Really? No, we don't have to put up with that. That's much, much more dangerous to the body politic in this country than anything coming out of Russia or China. Anything. Much more dangerous. He is a dangerous man. I think he's more dangerous than Trump. This guy's going to have, a global space-based internet, and it's going to be a private company. I said a few years ago, the UK should have its own nationally owned space arm, and that we should have basically our own 5G internet. space-based 5G internet, like Starlink, it should be publicly owned. People say, ha, 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 ha. What, you want this guy to own it? You want us to be dependent on his infrastructure? No, thank you. At long last, the UK government has finally suspended arms sales to Israel. The civil servants have reportedly begun indicating this when responding to export applications, with the newspaper, the Jewish Chronicle, writing this. One individual involved in arms exports to Israel who was seeking permission received a notice in response that stated, suspended pending policy review. This suspension is happening while the government conducts a wider policy review on the dangers of selling arms to Israel, which will see Foreign Secretary David Lammy make an ultimate decision. And it's important to note there is no fixed date set for the completion of that review, but it could mean we see exports begin again at a later date. When asked to confirm whether the government had suspended all arms export licenses for Israel, a Department for Business and Trade spokesperson said this. It is vital that we uphold both our domestic and international legal obligations when it comes to arms exports. We are reviewing the advice available and will come to a considered decision. The department also insisted that their policy in regards to Israel has not changed and added this. We continue to review export license applications on a case-by-case basis against the strategic export licensing criteria. It is vital that we uphold both our domestic and international legal obligations when it comes to arms exports. We are reviewing the advice regarding exports to Israel and no decision has been made. This is a fascinating story for me because you've had in the last several weeks, of course, the end of the previous suspension of funding to UNRWA. The UK has now renewed its funding to UNRWA. The US is isolated in not having that funding. And of course, you had the UK more recently saying that they would respect the decisions of the ICJ, who are expected to give out arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant. The UK is now saying we have no problem with that. They ended a legal challenge to that, which was co-signed with the Germans. It was really being pushed by the Americans. That's now gone. So surprisingly big, and I think positive steps being made by Labour with regards to Gaza, Israel, Palestine. But this, in terms of ending arms exports or suspending arms exports, even on the sly, even on a go slow, is really interesting. Mike, has Starmer and the new Labour government surprised you with its response to the ongoing conflict in Gaza?
In some ways they have, but in other ways they haven't, right? So the way in which I'm surprised is that Starmer's approach and Labour's approach at the moment creates clear water between them and the US. And I always felt that, I think one of the key things when it comes to foreign policy in the last 20, 30 years has been the fact that the UK and the US's foreign policy has been so wedded to one another. So when the US kind of jump, we say how high, right? That's kind of how it's operated. What's happening now is, in this moment, during one of the biggest crimes of our age, the UK are actually in many ways deviating from the US's approach, which is just unequivocally backing Israel no matter what. I think the UK are kind of taking a step back. So in that way, I am surprised. But in other ways, I'm not surprised, right? Because what we saw at the general election was Labour punished at the ballot box for its position on Gaza, right? So Labour, going into the election, had a very regressive view on this issue, right? And they dismissed pro-Palestine protesters. They kind of framed them as extremists and as people who just kind of were isolated in British politics and weren't electorally that relevant. And what happened is we saw big losses. We saw Tang and Debonair lose her seat. We saw Jess Phillips almost lose her seat. We saw Wes Streeting almost lose his seat. So kind of really big hitters came within a whisker of losing their seats or did lose their seat, right? John Ashworth, who is probably still crying on Twitter at this moment in time, he lost his seat too, right? So it was momentous. It was a big issue going into the election. So I think for Labour, going down the path of Israel's right to defend itself, and we're not going to look at arms bans and all of that, that would have been costly, right? The pressure would have continued to ramp up, and if you continue to hold that position going into a future election, you're likely to be punished for that position, or you're likely to be punished by elections that happen in the kind of upcoming year or so. So I do think for Labour, electorally, there was a decision to be made in terms of pivoting to a more progressive position on Gaza. Now, look, this is big news, right? And I do think that this should be celebrated by those of us who've been on the left, who've raising concerns about, Israel's war crimes and Israel's ongoing genocide, unfortunately. and its kind of ongoing war and terror on the people of Gaza. This is a win for us, right? This is, in many ways, our protests have kind of forced this position in many ways. In many ways, because we've made this issue so electorally important, and Labour are losing votes because of this issue, we've kind of forced their hand. So in some ways, I do feel proud of so many of us who took to the streets and protesting. Like, protest matters, it works, and it's why we should defend the right to protest. But then I also do think that Labour in many ways are doing the bare minimum, right? So these are things that are really important. Again, this is a big win for us. But, last week, or maybe the week before that, I think, kind of Lamy backtracked on recognising Palestine as a kind of as an independent state. I do think that's really important, right? So I do think that's important because the idea that we can kind of leave it some kind of peace process is difficult when Netanyahu has quite unequivocally and clearly said that he does not want to recognise a Palestinian state. So in doing so prior to some kind of peace process, we are actually in many ways providing a level of support for the Palestinian people. And I think they need that. So beyond just kind of these kind of discrete arms kind of bans and these things, again, great stuff. We need to kind of positionally, I think, as a country, get behind the Palestinian people and support them against the plight and the ongoing plight they are suffering at the hands of Israel. So far, some good steps made by Labour, and that should be celebrated, but they still have several things they could do. I think sanctions as well would be another kind of useful step. But yeah, so far, some good steps in the right direction.
I think that's right. I would say that recognising a state of Palestine, I think you've got 4 things there. They've done 3 of them. If they'd done all 4, my jaw would have dropped, frankly. And I have to agree, that has happened because of political pressure, right? This is a huge vulnerability for Labour moving forward. And there's a very simple political cost benefit here, right? You've lost John Ashworth, who was a very senior Labour figure. You almost lost Streeting and Jess Phillips. If both those guys had gone, by the way, they would be recognising the state of Palestine, right? Or if Starmer's majority was 5,000 or 6,000 smaller, because these are really significant things. Starmer's performance in his own seat, he's not going to lose the seat. Of course he's not. Well, he could do, but it's highly unlikely. Starmer's performance in his own seat was abysmal. So they know they have to get on top of this. Nigel Farage has defended himself over allegations that he helped cause the riots by spreading disinformation. He's saying it's all the fault of Andrew Tate. Indeed, Farage has also said that he is the victim of incitement to violence, of course. Let's take a look.
At no point in the last week or in the previous 30 years have I ever encouraged the use of violence. Have I ever encouraged the use of anti-democratic means? And yet, you get the internet and people saying things on the internet. We have senior Labour politicians like Andy MacDonald saying, I wanted the riots to happen. Mm-hmm. We have former Conservative MPs like Anna Soubry saying that I orchestrated the riots. Mm-hmm. We have LBC presenters like James O'Brien calling them the Farage riots. I have had nothing to do with any form of street violence now or at any point in my career.
But
and
people
this
aren't
level,
just being arrested for
and
going
this
out
level, this level of incitement to violence against me, which is utterly baseless, has led to a huge increase in my security uptick.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that you have been...
No. You as a broadcaster too have that responsibility. LBC as a broadcaster have that responsibility. You're splitting hairs.
I'm not splitting hairs, Nigel.
You are splitting hairs.
I'm keeping you to the words that you use.
I am telling you that in this country there is a widespread perception of two-tier policing.
But you're also in a position to give them the reality, Nigel.
Yes,
and the reality might be very different from their perception.
No,
you agree?
I personally believe that we police different communities according to their racial backgrounds in different ways, and I want it to end.
There's been race riots and pogroms, but don't worry. The real victim is Nigel Farage. Farage proceeded to talk about perhaps the most famous son of Luton, Andrew Tate.
In the immediate aftermath of the Southport stabbings, that engaged in conspiracy theories about who did this and about whether the police were telling the truth. You said, and I'm quoting here, some reports suggest he, the man charged, was known to the security services. Which reports?
This is the problem, isn't it? One of the reasons the Southport riots were as bad as they were is we weren't told the truth. There were stories online from some very prominent folks with big followings, Andrew Tate, etc., suggesting the man had crossed the English Channel in a boat in October 2023. Other suggestions that he was an active Muslim, and much of this led to the riots that we saw.
But you amplified that because you said some reports suggest.
I asked a very simple question. Was this person known or not? Now,
to the security services.
Absolutely.
And that's a perfectly legitimate question, which was raised by Yvette Cooper. But, Nigel
Yes.
Farage, you didn't just do that, did you? You said
Yes.
some reports suggest he was known to the security services. Those reports were from a fake news website amplified by Russian state TV and, as you mentioned, Andrew Tate. Which ones were you looking at?
Which adds to what I was asking for. Give us some clarity. Remember, the London Bridge attacker, we knew within an hour that this person was known to the security services. Whenever in Northern Ireland there was a terrorist outrage, very quickly people were told the background of the perpetrator.
But you didn't
I
just
asked
stop
a
there.
very simple question.
You said some reports suggest he was known to the security services. Those reports were a fake news website, Russian state TV,
Well,
and
I could
Andrew
have said,
Tate.
I could have said,
So which one was it, Nigel Farage?
I could have said, some reports suggest he crossed the channel last October. Some reports suggest he's an active
all of
Muslim.
that was unfounded.
I did none of those things. What I asked for was clarity. We didn't get clarity.
didn't
And
just
I
do
would
that.
argue that what happened in Southport would not have been of the same magnitude had the truth been told, and told very, very quickly. It wasn't for
You don't
many
need to
hours
amplify
that
the
we learnt more.
mistruths. No, you're right. But that was the chronology of it. But you don't need to amplify the mistruth.
I asked the question.
But to cite, quotes, some reports suggest the reports are fake. And you accept that now. They're misinformation.
There were thousands of fake reports everywhere.
you cited
all
them.
of which puts the emphasis on the questions being answered, which they weren't.
So did you accidentally fall for that misinformation?
No, I didn't believe any of it.
Or did you know it was wrong from the get-go?
I hadn't got a clue.
I didn't believe any of it. I just shared something which wasn't true while pogroms were kicking off. Now, if you're a regular person, okay, I think that's wrong. But ordinary people are allowed to say stupid things and be wrong. And this steered just the right side of legal matters, let's say. It wasn't incitement. Reports say stupid, it's injudicious, but whatever. But Mr. Farage, you are one of the country's most prominent political figures. In fact, by some measures, you're the most popular, or rather the least unpopular. And what's more, you're now an MP. And this kind of carry-on should be beneath you. Emphasis on should. Mike, what did you make of Farage's excuses?
Just a load of nonsense. I think Farage needs to understand, and I guess, look, he's not been an MP for long, and I think responsibility, he needs to get used to it. But I think he needs to understand that in his current position, he cannot sit there, have some kind of recording saying, these kind of alluding to the fact that the fake news stories are correct, right? That's an irresponsible use of his platform as a politician, as an elected member of Parliament. It's completely irresponsible. And I think at the start of that clip, so kind of the end of the clip focuses on him and the tweet and what he alluded to. At the start of the clip, Farage says, I don't encourage violence, I don't encourage people to take to the streets. And I don't think he is Tommy Robinson, right, saying we need to get to the streets, blah, blah, blah. He's not doing that. I think Farage is equally responsible for what's happening in Britain right now as a Tommy Robinson, someone who is quite clearly inciting violence, because for years and years and years, Farage has dedicated his platform to dehumanizing migrants, right? And that has consequences, right? So let's think, not even like casting our minds back to the EU referendum, let's cast our minds back to during this last election cycle. And what happened was, Farage was quoted as saying, Muslim people are not compatible with the British way of life. Now, people who understand how the concept of British way of life and British values are used, they tend to be used to kind of exclude an other. So previously it was black people incompatible with our way of life, or people from a particular ex-country incompatible. Farage was doing that in the case of Muslims. We fast forward a few weeks later, and lo and behold, some far-right idiots are taken to the streets to assault mosques and to assault Muslims, or people who they might perceive to be Muslims. So those words of they're not compatible with way of life have consequences. They're weighty. We can go back further to 2016, and kind of the undertone of a lot of his argument was the idea that we're going to have loads of people who don't understand our culture coming into Britain if we stay in the EU. Now, the kind of reading between the lines there was there are loads of rumours about Turkey joining the EU, and the idea that we're going to have loads of Muslims joining the EU. So in many ways, lots of the views being expressed on the streets of Britain, these reprehensible views that are being violently expressed in Britain, these riots that we're seeing across Britain, they are sharing the views of Farage. They are acting on these views that Farage has helped platform through his career. His entire career, Farage, is associated with dehumanizing migrants. Right, that's literally it. He's not known for anything else. Dehumanizing migrants, the e-referendum was part of that kind of pick that story. But it's all about dehumanizing migrants. So I think Farage, yes, you don't go into the streets and say people come to the streets and attack mosques, but you're providing the intellectual framework for those idiots who go out and incite violence and actually carry out violence. So Farage, you can't hide away from your responsibility here. You are in many ways culpable for this and responsible for this. And it's really, really important that politicians understand that their words carry weight and can be acted on by kind of idiots.
I mean, it's just incredible that somebody who he got more than 4 million votes in the last general election, his party, Reform, he says that Reform are going to replace the Conservative Party as the party of right-wing sentiment in the UK. It's a big, big ambition. It's a big objective. Very hard to do. Very ambitious, very impressive sounding. And then you're saying, oh, my source of news was Andrew Tate, a man being charged with trafficking offences, a man who is best known, frankly, for pickup artistry and quick talking on TikTok. He's your news source? Wasn't the Financial Times, wasn't the Telegraph even. No, it was Andrew Tate. Well, look, if you want to replace the Tories, you might need to be a little bit more serious and judicious in where you get your information. Mike, thanks for joining us tonight. And again, well done on that PhD.
Thank you very much, Aaron. And thanks for all the lovely messages. I keep getting some nice messages. So thank you, everyone, for being so polite and friendly.
And thanks, everyone, for watching this evening. We'll be back tomorrow night at 6 p.m. with Michael Walker. He'll be discussing the Kamala Harris show and, of course, her pick for VP. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.